Dementia Researcher with a blog and a rating.
We all know that sinking feeling when an experiment we've put days, weeks, or even months of effort into doesn't work. Whether that's a failed staining protocol, troubleshooting Western blots, or electrophysiology recording setups which refuse to cooperate, disappointment is an unavoidable part of research. In this blog, I'm going to share how I've learnt to overcome that feeling and how you can keep a positive mindset towards your work. My take-home message from this blog is that failed experiments do not make you a bad scientist. All scientists, at any stage of their career, have experiments which don't work the way that they'd hoped. As researchers, our role is to discover new things, so it's actually really common for experiments to fail. As scientists, we spend a lot of time celebrating successful experiments and exciting results, but the reality is a lot of science involves things going wrong. As an electrophysiologist, I've had to learn to adapt quite quickly. Wholesale patch clamp can sometimes feel like a huge amount of effort for very little reward. There are countless variables that can affect an experiment, and troubleshooting often becomes a significant part of the job. Yet everything that goes wrong teaches you something. When an experiment fails, you've usually learned something about what doesn't work, which can be just as valuable as learning what does work. Over time, I've tried not to let my experiments dictate my mood. That's easier said than done, of course. In the moment, it's completely normal to be annoyed when something doesn't work. We're human, and we care about our work, and we take pride in it. The best piece of advice I have been given about failed experiments was from my lab manager during my MRes degree. He said, a lot of people's moods are determined by whether their experiment has gone well or not, and then they're in that mindset for the rest of the day, even after work, and try not to let it affect you in that way. I've really taken that advice on board, and when I can feel myself getting into that well-known rut, I can pull myself out and remind myself of that great piece of advice. Some major breakthroughs in medicine were discovered by accident, which at the time could have easily been viewed as a failed experiment. For example, X-rays, which are widely used in medicine today, were discovered by accident when Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen was experimenting on a cathode ray tube and noticed a glow from a nearby screen. When he put his hand in front of this glow, he noticed that the bones of his hand were actually projected onto this screen. Another famous example, which led to a Nobel Prize, penicillin was discovered by accident by Sir Alexander Fleming. The fact he had mould growing on his petri dish could have easily been viewed as a failure. I'm not saying that every time an experiment doesn't go to plan, that it can be a major discovery, but rather it's about the mindset that you have towards your work moving forward. One thing that's really helped me is maintaining a healthy work-life balance. Unless I genuinely need to work in the evenings or on the weekends, for example, preparing a presentation or finishing off a report, I try to leave my work in the lab when I go home. It's easier said than done, but having that separation can be extremely helpful, especially when your experiments haven't gone the way you've hoped. Often, having a good evening away from the lab, I can then return with a much clearer head and a better approach. Especially during the initial stages of a PhD, failed experiments really do remind us of the qualities needed to be a researcher. Not only understanding the science, but also being able to persevere and to be resilient. Research rarely progresses in a straight line. Progress comes with many setbacks, troubleshooting sessions, and repeated attempts. The ability to keep going and try again when things don't work, and to take a step back and think about what went wrong with a clear head is just as important as technical skill. Another great piece of advice I've received is to know when to stop. It can have a real impact on your mental state after weeks or even months of failed attempts to do the same experiment. While troubleshooting is invaluable, it's also very important to know when to stop, take a step back, and reevaluate your approach. Taking a step back and having a rethink can be really helpful to stop yourself getting into a rut and trying to do something which is unlikely to work. For example, I spent a few months working quite long hours trying to clone a plasmid, which I designed to optimise my transient transfections. However, due to reasons that I wasn't aware of at the time, this was quite unlikely to work. Alongside this, I was working on optimising the transfections with the plasmids that I already had, and when I took a step back, spoke to some colleagues and reevaluated, I realised that it would be a much more productive use of my time to continue optimising the transfections and bench the molecular cloning experiments for the time being. In hindsight, this turned out to be the right call. Now my transfections are working really well and consistently every week, and I may not have been at this stage if I had carried on down the molecular cloning rabbit hole. I have found that speaking to colleagues and getting advice on your work can really help me recognise when to try again or when to take a step back and reevaluate. We are a community as researchers, and it often takes more than one person to identify where to troubleshoot in a protocol or why things aren't working as they should. Asking for help and advice does not make you a bad scientist. Really, it's the complete opposite. Good scientists know when to take other people's ideas on board and to recognise that science is a team effort. Especially when starting a PhD, it can be really easy to compare yourself to others. Sometimes your colleagues' experiments going really well can coincide with a time where yours aren't quite going how you would hope. But the point of doing a PhD is that every thesis will be something new and something unique. Since all PhDs are different, it's futile comparing yourself to anybody else because it's only you who is working on your project. It's important not to compare yourself to your peers and to be confident in your work. The reality is, experiments will continue to fail from time to time, and that's the same for all scientists. The key is not avoiding failure, but rather learning how to respond to it, adapt, and move forward in a positive mindset. In research, success isn't about never encountering problems, it's about having the resilience to overcome them. Next time you're staring at a failed experiment, remember it does not mean you're a bad scientist. Instead, see it for what it really is, a normal part of research. Research is challenging because we're trying to answer questions that nobody has ever answered before. If things worked perfectly every time, it just wouldn't be research. So keep a positive mindset, stay resilient, and keep going.
Thank you for listening. Join the Dementia Research bloggers and share your own views.